Okay, Adventure Alan here, and welcome to part 2 of our review of the REI Co-op Flash Air 2 tent. Again, we think this is a very significant tent. It is user-friendly, it's affordable, it's off the shelf, and it's ultralight. And those things don't normally occur in the same sentence. But part 2 is going to be a deep dive into this tent. We're going to cover topics that anybody who's seriously interested in buying this tent or already owns the tent will definitely want to watch. We're going to cover why the two-person version of this tent, the REI Co-op Flash Air 2 tent, is significantly better than the one-person tent. And even if you're planning on soloing, we think you should consider the two-person versus the one-person. We are going to cover a lot of tips and tricks on how to best pitch and use this tent. There's a lot of adjustability and adaptability and some cool features of this tent, and we'll help you best manage and use those to get the most out of the tent. And then finally, and then most important, we're going to cover Condensation Management 101. And condensation management is the key to using these single wall, double wall hybrid tents. If you manage condensation, it's a great tent and a great experience. And there are a lot of features in the REI Flash Air 2 tent that will help you manage condensation or even potentially eliminate it in a lot of circumstances. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump into this video. Okay, so I'm going to show you, I'm not going to go into ad nauseum exactly how to pitch the tent, but I'm going to show you some tips and tricks and sort of the general things that you're looking for and how to do kind of the best job of pitching this tent. The tent actually comes with 5 poles. So you've got these 2 hub poles right here. You've got these 2 vertical poles by the door poles or the vestibule poles, which you don't need. And then you have the 1 foot pole there. So there are 5 in total, 3 of which you do need to use to pitch the tent. The first thing to understand is that there are 2 things to stake out in each corner of the tent. There is the tent body, which is this thin gray cord, and then there is the rain fly, which is this orange cord. And the first thing you want to do is just pitch the floor out, these 4 gray cords, and stake them out approximately a 45-degree angle. And normally you would just forget this and not do this one until after you've done the doors. So one of the things I forgot to mention is that when you're starting out this tent, don't drive the stakes in, don't get too wetted with your stake position. What you're going to do is kind of loosely get them in the ground, and then once you've sort of got all the 6 stakes in, and there are 6 stakeout points, the 4 corners in each door, then you go around and you reposition the stakes so that everything looks taut and nice, and then you can give them that extra push to put them deep into the ground. Once you get that staked out, then you're up to working on the doors. You insert this hub pole in this sleeve right here. And then it's super important that you get this clip done because bad things happen. And then you have 2 options here with the tent. You can use the supplied pole, which if you don't use trekking poles, you're going to need to do, but far better is to use your own trekking pole, which is stronger. If you measure the supplied pole, it's about 39 inches or about 99 centimeters. And you could just, really good to know what that is on your trekking pole. For my trekking pole right here, that's this section. This one's not extended, and this thinner section is at the 130 centimeter mark, and that's just about perfect. That saves you a lot of fiddling time if you've already got this sort of trekking pole preset. Once you've done that, it's time to stake out this door. And what you do there is you just take this rain fly and you put this stake out here and you try and get it at a pretty good angle. And then you go and repeat that for the other side. Once you get both these doors set up, and they should set up pretty quickly and easily as long as you've got these trekking pole heights set up, then you go out and you tension the rain fly. So you hook these orange cords over the the stakes, and then you snug them down. And you remember I said about 45 degrees for the corners? 45 degrees seems pretty good for the head end. For the foot end, to get this panel to pull tight, it's actually a little narrower than that, but you can play around with it. But I find if it's at a 45, this long section of the lower portion of the door is a little saggy, so that's one thing you're going to look out for. Another thing is there is a pole in the foot section of this tent right here. And it seems like it's a production issue, but it's very tight to fit that pole into this foot section. I did with a lot of elbow grease, got it in, but I am currently leaving the pole in this, which is no problem. I'm just leaving the pole in the tent when I pack it up. I'm imagining it'll stretch over time, but just know that it might be better to get this pole into the tent before you leave the house. I'm sure that REI will correct that at a later date. I'll show you one little hack here, which I really like that I've done with the tent. The tent actually comes with 4 extra tie-out cords in addition to 6 stakes that come with the tent. I'm suggesting that you probably want a few more tie-out cords and a few more stakes. I'll cover that later. But one of the things you can do with one of these tie-out cords, which I've done, is I've looped it through the top of this trekking, this hubs thing. And what that allows me to do is then I can actually peel this door back without the tent losing any of its support. It allows me to have, this is the way I prefer to use the tent, allows me to have this door fully open, which I like. I have 2 stakes here, but you could use the same stake. Another cool thing that you can do with these doors, and a lot of times, you know, say the wind's coming from the foot of the tent, and I want this door open, but the wind's coming this direction, I want this door closed, and you notice that the tent comes only with the tie-out on that door. So one of the things you can do with those spare tie-outs, in which I've done with this door, is you can put the tie-out to this door, and then just hook it into the stake, and you can essentially tension this out and use this to tighten this door out and set yourself up in this mode. So the wind's coming this direction, you can get in and out of the tent, you maintain your ventilation. Remember I said you kind of want one of these doors, if it's damp, you want one of these doors open much of the time. And again, I told you my favorite mode is with these doors kind of peeled back in what I call stargazing mode. And then going up onto the ceiling of the tent here, I've hung a storage bag, and you can see there's a hang loop right up here, and then there's another hang loop right there, and I ran a cord across them, and then I just put the storage sack. It's a great place to keep your iPhone, your headlamp, maybe a hat and gloves, you know, the normal things you need in a tent. But I highly suggest that it's a hack that you might want to consider for this tent. The other thing is I showed you, you know, they give you these extra tie-out cords. This tent has a ton of tie-out points on it. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but the basic strategy is if the wind is coming from this direction, then you want to use the tie-outs on this part of the tent to stiffen it. If it's coming in from this side, you want to add more guy lines here. You know, you could theoretically, I don't know how many, it's probably got another 8 tie-out points besides the doors that you could potentially tie out. But if you are intending to camp above tree line or exposed to wind, then it would be good to at least have, I'd say, 4 extra tie-outs for this tent. That's sort of the general, I think that'll get you out of most of the problems that I sort of had initially pitching the tent. It's always a good idea to do this in your backyard. Try and replicate what I've done, get everything set up so you know how it works. It's a terrible time to do it up on a windy ridge in the mountains for the first time. But that sort of concludes the sort of pitching and tips and trips. tricks. Okay, so now I'm going to cover a really important point, and that's why the two-person version of this tent, the REI Co-op Flash Air 2, is significantly better than the one-person version of the tent. And there are a few other details, but it mostly boils down to condensation management. And you remember that I said that condensation management is really the key to making a tent like this work. And the two-person version of this tent does a way better job on condensation management. The first thing is, you remember we talked about a single wall, double wall tent, where there's a lot more double wall portion to this two-person tent, because both this front wall is mesh and a double wall keeping you away from a potentially condensing rain fly. And if I walk back over it here, you'll see that we have the mirror image back here. So in the one-person tent, you would have to worry about condensation on the ceiling panels, same as the one-person. But in the two-person tent, you don't have to worry about it here on the back wall, because this back wall is double walled. But in the one-person tent, this mesh is gone and it's all rain fly. So you have to worry about potentially brushing up against the whole back wall of the tent too, which could potentially get you or your sleeping bag wet. Anyway, moving back to the front of the tent here, probably even more important is the number one thing you can do in a tent to reduce condensation is to move the moist air out of the tent, and you can only do that by ventilation. And what you have here in the two-person tent is you have a huge ventilation panel here and a huge ventilation panel there. For airflow to work, there has to be some place for the air to go in and some place for it to exit. And you can obviously see that in the one-person tent, which has no mesh in the back of it and has a solid, non-breathable rear wall, there's no way for the air to move through the tent easily. So, our suggestion with the two-person tent, if it's nice, you use it in this mode. The other thing that I'll cover here is these doors, which have multiple positions that you can set them up at. I have them in this sort of stargazing full ventilation mode. Nice when it's not raining, it's warm, it's buggy, you get more ventilation, you can look at the stars. One of the other positions for these doors, if I undo this one, I'll just show you one of the doors. You can actually sort of zip this forward and move this door more into sort of covering the entrance. I'll undo this other door here as well, and reconfigure them. So you can sort of zip this out into sort of like just a slight sort of like semi-overhang here. So if it's just the light rain, you get this nice kind of overhang here, but you still get the ventilation in the tent, which is good to avoid condensation. So there's this mode right here, and you can see it's just covering the tent door enough that you could get in and out and keep most of the rain out. Obviously, another mode with these doors is to bring one of these fully forward and stake it out. If the wind is, say, coming in this direction, I can fully stake out this door right here. So finally, we're back in full rainfly mode. And you notice that even as I have this in full rainfly mode, there's almost 12 inches underneath here, which allows for good airflow through the tent, which is super important for these hybrid single wall, double wall tents. You want to get some airflow here to avoid condensation. So I really like this sort of large, deep vestibule awning thing, but with some airflow underneath it. And we've done some humidity testing using these remote sensors here, pretty sophisticated scientific ones. And we've measured the outside humidity. We've hung one on the tree, and then we've hung one up in the tent here. And we've measured the humidity and temperature inside the tent and outside the tent. And in this mode, they're pretty much identical. And even if you were to push these doors down, remember I said that the doors don't come all the way down. It's about a 12-inch here. So if the doors are down, you still have this great ventilation moving across through the tent, which is going to move a lot more air than, well, I'll show you later, but you know, you've got these tiny little ceiling vents here. But you know, you look at this, it's maybe half a foot in area versus this, which is many, many feet in area, and this area, which is many feet. This is going to move a lot more air. So again, you know, using these sensors, we can actually conclusively prove, but not only by the amount of condensation that's on the tent, you definitely want to use this cross ventilation on the 2-person tent. And it's why we would actually recommend that most people, unless you're just completely desperate to save half a pound and $50, this is actually a better 1-person tent too. It's spacious, but the other advantage to the 2-person tent is you have 2 doors and 2 vestibules. So if the wind changes direction overnight, you can change which vestibule you enter and exit from. Also, if you're a 2-person, you're usually sharing gear, which means overall you're going to have more vestibule space. Usually you set up one vestibule for like cooking and muddy shoes, maybe entry and exit, and then the other vestibule is gear storage. But also with the 2-person tent, you basically have 4 doors. You have 1 door here, 1 door here, 1 door there. So depending on how the wind is blowing, you can usually keep a half a door open on either side to get this ventilation going through the tent. So we're a huge fan, especially I think REI did a really, really nice job with all these different door configurations, and you can peel it back or have it halfway over. It's going to be a key to making this tent work for you. Okay, I hope you enjoyed part 2 of the REI Flash Air 2 tent review, and hope you got a lot of benefit out of it in terms of how to manage condensation, how to better pitch and use the tent, and hopefully you understand why the 2-person tent is so awesome. Anyway, if you like this video, please subscribe to the Adventure Allen channel. Go ahead and click that bell so you get notified of new content, and then go ahead and look in the comment section below. It'll have a link to our review and a bunch of our great content. And until then, this is Adventure Allen signing out.